Few things in this life are more devastating than finding out the person you love most in the world isn't who you thought they were. That's exactly what happened to Blake Ruff. When he married the love of his life, all he could think about was starting a family with her. Then everything went south. After years together, Blake learned the truth about who his wife really was, and he would never be the same again. This is the story of Blake and Lori, and their fairy tale marriage turned into a nightmare. Hello, wonderful people. I'm Scott Leffler for WonderBot, and here is Man thought he married the perfect woman until he discovered her dark past. Before we begin, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos. It was 2003 when Blake Ruff first laid eyes on Lori Erica Kennedy. It was love at first sight, and he knew his life would never be the same. He had no idea, however, just how much it would change. After a year of courtship, the two were married, despite the fact that Ruff barely knew anything about his wife. Was she hiding something about her past? In time, the answers would reveal themselves, although Lori wouldn't be the one to tell. Blake might have been okay with his new wife refusing to get into details about her past, but his family was less trusting. They thought it was highly suspicious that the only thing Lori said was that she had a rough upbringing. When Lori met Blake, she'd just moved to Texas from Arizona. She didn't have any friends, and they met in Bible class. For Blake, that was enough to know. His family voiced their concerns from the start, but they fell on deaf ears. With no family to speak of, Lori married Blake in a private ceremony. He didn't even invite his own family. Only the couple's preacher was there, happy to see the two lovebirds become one. With the ceremony over, the couple decided it was time to start a family. Blake's life was seemingly perfect. He had a job he loved and had found the woman he knew he was meant to spend the rest of his life with. Adding to their family was the obvious next step. Now happily married, Blake and Lori began trying to have kids. Sadly, like so many people in the United States, the path was anything but easy. Lori had several miscarriages. Still determined to start their own brood, the Ruffs chose to try in vitro fertilization. The new plan worked, and before long, Lori was pregnant with a baby girl. They couldn't have been happier. Blake never could have imagined what would happen next, and it would leave him shaken to his core. In 2008, Lori gave birth to a healthy and happy girl. The event should have been one for her and Blake to celebrate. Instead, Lori began pushing everyone in her life away, especially Blake. Lori acted overprotective of their daughter and became incredibly distant. Blake had known that she tended to be a private person, but now she was taking it to a new level. Something was wrong, but Blake had no idea what it was, and Lori refused to tell him. Before long, Lori stopped keeping Blake at a distance. She began asking him questions about his family and their history. She wanted to know everything. It was an odd turn of events for someone who refused to say anything about their own past. What was Lori trying to do? Was she suddenly coming back around to the father of her child? Would they finally be able to happily raise their family together? Blake remained optimistic about the couple's future, even when his family was not. Blake's family finally had enough of Lori's antics when his parents were banned from seeing their granddaughter. The two sides began fighting nonstop, putting Blake in one of the toughest positions of his life. With so much pressure on her, Lori fell into a deep depression. No one was giving her privacy, and it was beginning to affect her both emotionally and mentally. Knowing she needed to do something to try and save her marriage, Lori agreed to try couples counseling. Blake and Lori began marriage counseling in 2010. They both knew it was the last chance they were going to have to save their marriage. In the end, however, there was nothing they could do. After 7 years of marriage, Blake accepted the harsh reality that Lori was not the same person as when they met. The next spring, Lori and Blake filed for divorce. Their story was far from over, though. They still needed to figure out how to co-parent their daughter. With her marriage over, Lori sunk further into her depression. She stopped eating and her health rapidly declined. She lost weight and became impossible to communicate with. The only person she would talk to was her pastor. During these visits, she would ramble about the problems in her life while fidgeting. Her behavior was incredibly worrisome. She'd lost everything and was becoming unhinged. Would she find a way back to happiness? There had to be someone who still cared. At the end of 2010, Lori was under too much stress and saw no way out. On Christmas Eve, she drove to the Ruff family household in a black SUV and parked. She took her life in the car. Blake's father found her the next morning with 2 notes, one for him and one for their daughter. When Blake opened his note, he noticed the writing was completely illegible. Curious, he opened his daughter's letter too, and it was more of the same. Blake was in shock by what had just happened. He knew that Lori was having problems, but he had no idea she was in such a vulnerable state. Then he made his big discovery, learning that his family might have been right about her from the start. While sorting through Lori's old things, Blake came across a lunchbox he'd never seen before. Inside, the truth about his wife's past was revealed, and Blake couldn't believe what he learned. Blake found the lunchbox in the back of the closet, hidden behind a heap of boxes. He knew it wasn't right to open the box, but he also needed to know if anything Lori had told him about herself was true. Sitting there by himself, Blake couldn't break open the box to see its contents. He needed help and knew exactly who he could trust. Without hesitation, he went to his local precinct and asked a police officer for help. With help from the law, Blake was finally able to see the contents of the lunchbox. Inside were ID cards from different states and a birth certificate no one had seen. On the certificate was a name Blake had never heard. Then it all made sense. Blake pulled out another document, a name change document formed from 1988. Lori would have been 17 years old at the time. The secrets to Lori's past were finally starting to reveal themselves, and there was no turning back for Blake now. Thanks to the name change document, Blake and the officer discovered that Lori had changed her name from Becky Sue Turner in 1988. Blake and the officer dug deeper into Lori's past and learned something even more shocking. Becky Sue Turner had perished in a house fire in 1971 when she was 2 years old. If Lori wasn't Becky, then who was she? This puzzling clue led police to open an investigation into the real identity of Lori Ruff. The first piece of the puzzle that police solved was that Lori was truly a woman without a past. She never lied to Blake about it because there was nothing to tell. In Idaho, she was given a state ID and a social security card as Lori. She used her new forms of identification to go back to school and get her GED and enter a business program at the University of Texas. When cops tried to trace her whereabouts as Lori before that, nothing came up in their database. As the investigation continued, police were left with no good leads. They met one former acquaintance who said that in the early 90s, Lori had worked as a dancer at a gentleman's club. Police then spoke to a Social Security investigator who had been following the case. His name was Joe Velling, and he had nothing to add. Despite trying to track down the truth about Lori for years, every lead he came up with turned into another dead end. With years of searching behind them and no answers to be found, Blake and the police had given up. Then, in 2013, Colleen Fitzpatrick heard about the case. She was a genealogist, and she asked if she could have a DNA sample from the couple's daughter. Thanks to the DNA, Fitzpatrick was able to find a connection with Lori in Pennsylvania, a cousin named Michael Cassidy. She told Joe Velling, who hopped on the first plane he could to meet Cassidy, and finally got the answers he and Blake desperately needed. Joe arrived in Pennsylvania and met up with Michael Cassidy and his family. He was hoping the truth about Lori would finally come out. As soon as he showed the family her picture, someone recognized her as Kimberly McLean. McLean ran away from her home at 17 years old when her mother married a man she hated. Now that Joe and Blake finally knew the truth about who Lori was, they couldn't help but wonder what happened between her running away and meeting him. The journey to discover the truth about who Lori really was took investigators 6 years. In 2010, when it was discovered she was lying about her identity, authorities listed her as Jane Doe in their system. In 2016, Colleen Fitzpatrick uncovered the truth with help from Blake's daughter. DNA proved to be an invaluable tool in the case, showing just how far science has come. Even though it can't solve every mystery, without advancements in genealogy, the Ruff family might still be left in the dark. It's no small wonder that the case of one missing daughter was solved through the DNA of another. Since ancestry companies started using DNA to backtrack family trees, several familial mysteries have been solved. Not all have been as dramatic as the Ruff and Cassidy story was, but each is unique in its own right. Of course, bizarre cases like Lori's continue to baffle investigators around the world. Perhaps as science continues to develop, more of these will be solved.